Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing with you guys all the ins and outs of print and cut with an inkjet printer, and I have an HP printer which I will link in the description box below. First and foremost, I want to explain that I haven't always had great luck with print and cut. When I first started using my printer, I pretty much hated it. I thought it was my printer, but turns out it's not your printer. If you're frustrated with your printer, I bet you so much money that it is not your printer. It's most likely the settings that you're using to print with your printer. So every paper is different, and when your printer goes to print on any specific type of paper, you need to tell it what it needs to do to print perfectly. So that is what you need to do to get perfect results no matter what paper you're using. You need to know how to change your setting. Okay, so here's settings. You always want to turn on the system's dialog. Yes, the system's dialog toggle, no matter what you're printing. Always toggle that on. The bleed toggle, that is going to depend on if you are using a matte or a glossy paper. If you're using a matte paper, you always want to turn the bleed on. Bleed on for matte paper, always. That is going to give you like a heavier print, and the matte paper is going to be able to absorb that extra print ink. It's going to be able to handle it a lot better than a glossy paper is going to. If you turn your bleed on with a glossy paper, it may work, but it also may not. I've had like water slide papers turn out where like it's just a big giant smudge of ink. It's just so heavy, it ruins the image. So be careful with that. In my opinion, what I do typically is just leave the bleed off if I'm using a glossy paper at all. Just leave it off. It uses less ink, and therefore the glossy paper can handle the amount of ink a lot better. But if you are using a matte, the bleed is nice because it uses extra ink and it kind of forms this border around your image. That way, if your Cricut is cutting just slightly off, you won't have like a white line on parts of your images where it's cut. Matte paper, bleed on. Glossy paper, bleed off. So let me give you some examples of when you're going to leave the bleed on. For matte papers, that's going to be your printable cardstock, your printable vinyl or label or sticker paper, and your printable HTV for iron-on designs, if it's the StarCraft that I use from 651. Now your bleed is going to be off for glossy papers if you're using a glossy printable vinyl, water slides, and when I say water slide, I'm talking white or clear. They're both the same. They're glossy. Photo paper, like glossy photo paper or glossy photo sticker paper. So matte bleed on, glossy bleed off. Regardless, always turn on your system's dialog so that you can change the settings in your preferences on your computer. And you can save specific profiles, like I'll show you on mine. I have a profile saved for matte paper and a profile saved for glossy paper. That way I don't have to change all these settings every time I come in. I just pick my profile and my settings are loaded. If you're printing with anything besides plain paper, it's thicker and your printer is not going to be able to decide between 1, 2, or 3 pieces because it's thicker. So in my experience, it works out a lot better in your favor. You're going to waste a lot less paper if you just load one paper at a time and print one at a time. Okay, so you've changed your system's dialog and you're ready to print. This is when I usually run over to my printer and I load my one page and I come back to my system dialog and I click the print button. Something to keep in mind also here is that some papers, it matters what side is facing up or facing down when you load your paper tray, and some papers it doesn't. So typically printable cardstock is printable on either side of the paper, and I'm trying to see which ones are going to matter. So the printable vinyl is definitely going to matter because there's a backing and then there's a front, the part that's going to be adhesive. Your printable HTV definitely matters. Your glossy printable vinyl, your water slide paper, your glossy photo paper, all of these things have fronts and backs. So pretty much the only thing on this list that you can print on either side would be your printable cardstock or your plain printer paper. So when you're loading your tray into your printer with your one piece of paper, you want to make sure you're loading it correctly, and that would be with the back facing up. So if you have a glossy paper that you're printing on, you want to make sure that glossy side is face down when you load it into your tray. That way, when it gets sucked up into your printer, it's printing on the correct side of the paper. So we've got that out of the way. So when you load your paper into your tray, you have a second chance at changing settings to further improve the quality of your image. So for my printer in particular, which I really love that it does this, every time I load a paper, it asks me, hey, what are you printing on? And that is because it is a very important question. It helps your printer understand what it needs to do to give you the best quality image. If your printer doesn't do this, I suggest you read your manual or just click around in the menu a little bit to figure out what you need to do to change your settings, so that every time you load a paper, you go in and tell it what you're going to be printing on. There's 2 opportunities for you to change settings, and that's in your system dialog when you're printing from the computer on your Cricut design space. You open up that box to change the settings, and then when you're loading your paper into your printer, that is also a chance for you to change settings. After you print, I don't care what you've printed on, leave it. Leave it on the tray to dry, especially if you're loading this piece of paper onto your Cricut, because I always use my brayer tool to ensure that my paper is very firmly attached and there's no air bubbles between my paper and my mat. And if you do that right after you've printed, of course I'm talking about inkjet printers now, I'm not sure how this works for laser, this is an inkjet printer tutorial. If you do it immediately, you will smudge your ink. And that is my whole spiel. That is my whole little outline here. Thanks for listening. Be patient. It will come to you. I did a lot of research while I was learning, and that can only take you so far. Watching videos and learning from someone else really can only take you so far. I think that I learned most of what I've learned just from trial and error, and that's not always fun because it doesn't feel good to waste material, waste supplies, but nothing will teach you better than how bad it feels when you mess something up. And so I really think that is like a learning experience for you when you do something wrong and you say, okay, I'm never doing it that way again. Now I know how to do it. So thanks again for watching.